Everyone, I'm Aurora from Taipei Tech. I'm very glad to welcome all of you to the MIT City Science Summit 2021 Cities Within, co-hosted with MIT City Science and Taipei Tech. And this workshop is hosted by Andorra. I'd like to remind you that the whole workshop is recorded and live streamed on YouTube. And now I'd like to welcome Marc Pons and pass the mic to him. Hi.
Hi, hello everybody, and thank you to join us to this workshop. So, how is on the screen? Just check that everything is seeing the screen. Okay, that's it. So, so thanks again to everybody to join us. So given the topic this year and taking into account a little bit the research that we are conducting here in Andorra, and also the experience that, as you know, so our lab is quite involved and quite present in all the government and country actions that they are performing, and it's giving us some experience and some also challenges that we wanted to share and we wanted to also discuss in this session. So we are talking about hyperlocal solution to our problems, no? And we were really eager to discuss and introduce to some of the members of the network to frameworks. So the Living Lab frameworks that most of you are familiar, and maybe the other one, the Biosphere Reserve of the UNESCO, that maybe is a little bit less unknown from some of the colleagues in the network. But we really wanted to take a look at these two frameworks and really discuss together how these two frameworks really could help to develop more resilient communities. That is one of the main goals of the network, and mainly how we could really move to effective local solutions to these global problems. To do this discussion, today they are with me. I'm happy to introduce Professor Fernando Vilariño. So he's a member of the executive board of the ENOL, that is a European network of living labs, as well as he's a professor at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and associate director of the Computer Vision Center. So he's specialist, and he's a very interesting researcher and active people, really linking different dimensions of technology, innovation, society, social innovation, and really active in how, about the topic that we will discuss, how we move to actions, to effective actions to change, to transform cities, communities. And we will be happy to share with him a little discussion and hear from their experiences they have. We'll have also Marc Pons. Marc Pons is the lead of the project Andorra Biosphere Reserves. So we as a country, we are trying to apply to become the first biosphere reserve as a country, and because we think that, as we will discuss, it's a very interesting framework that will help us to really keep going in this challenge that we started several years ago, and that the City Science Network is here in our challenge working with us. And finally, myself, that we will introduce and give a wrap up a little bit how we think that these two frameworks, and especially how the interlink and how linking these two frameworks really could be an effective approach to really give response to these big challenges. So, sorry. Change. So when we are talking about sustainability and resilient communities, that is one of the challenges that we are trying to work all the colleagues of the network. So how we really develop more resilient communities. So we've seen that in general, so the main goals, the actions are where we have to focus and what we have to work has a global consensus. So most of right now, so be the the companies itself, the governments, the European Union, different institutions, they are quite clear and they are taken, for example, this SDG framework as a mandatory framework to really implement this shift, this transition to more resilient and more sustainable communities. So all we know that we have to perform a climate action, and what are the challenges in terms of climate action adaptation that we have, or for example, in terms of transitions to more green energy or more inclusive policies. Even we have already so strategies and policies really well defined and clear, not only at country level, also at more higher level, for example, the new European Green Deal, as well as also at regional level or even at municipal level, where we have these strategies and policies really as quite well defined, more or less the focus where should be and how we could act to go through. However, we see that reality, it's quite different. So we know that we have these frameworks, these strategies, policies, more or less well defined, but we see that we are really still failing to real implementation and to have impact still to the local communities. So why that? So we see that there are many gaps still that we are not reaching to or achieving to deal with it and have this impact, no, to real actions. So one is we see that still, even that we is a topic that it's in the agenda of many government, municipalities, institutions, we still lack this citizens engagement in the design and definition of policies and strategies. We see that we are talking a lot about citizen participation, about that, but still seeing that this engagement, it's still not effective. We see also a lack of appropriate translation of these global problems to the local problems and realities. So we all know, no, we all talk about the challenge of climate change, the challenge about energy transition, mobility, whatever, but we still lack to really define or have accurate translation of these more global problems to these more hyper-local, local or hyper-local problems and realities. Moreover, we have a lack of real and effective dialogue and spaces and also processes for this cooperation. So we've seen that, no? that we are talking, many institutions talking of participatory processes, of engagements and on, but we still see that this lack of real and transparent, effective dialogue spaces and process that really will be not as aesthetic as they should be and more real participatory and co-creation processes that should be and we need to really have this impact. And finally, we see that this lack of fast feedback, assessment, and redefinition and continuous improvement or adaptation of this strategy in action. So we see that we have this energy or strategic energy plan for 2030. We have this commitment for CO2 emissions or several plans, strategies. However, we see that many of these instruments or many of these frameworks really don't have this capacity or this way to really monitor, assess, and redefine in an agile, flexible, and really fast way to really be to really be adapting and knowing if these measures or these actions that we are defining are having an impact or not, or should be modified, or if the impact is expected to the different stakeholders. So this is, I think, four main points that we see that they are still lacking in how we really are working with communities in order to do this ecological transition or this shift to more sustainable transitions. And this is one of the topics that really wanted to discuss today. So as I said, in our team are really working on this, and this is why we started really to focus on two frameworks, and are the two frameworks that really wanted to discuss today. One of them is the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve that today, so Marc Pons will give us a glimpse, some present a little bit what they are and why are what should be or would be relevant to this definition of more resilient communities, and also what would be the challenges, weaknesses, and opportunities that we can have with this framework. So please, Marc.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good. So I will present in short some summaries or some briefly ideas about what is a biosphere reserve. In this sense, just for introduction, we can say that a biosphere reserve is about humanity, it's about economy, it's about biodiversity, heritage, sustainability, future, balance, innovation, or knowledge. In fact, the Biosphere Reserve is everything related with the earth and the humanity. It's about life. So, a Biosphere Reserve are sites established by countries and recognized under the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Program in order to promote a balance between. We're talking about the zonation of Biosphere Reserve. In this sense, all the Biosphere Reserve has to present three kind of zones, and each zone is made with a single purpose. In the center of the Biosphere Reserve, it is always found the core area. This core area, it's looking for strictly protection and natural conservation. This means that it has to be a national park. Okay, and the main goal of this area is to protect the biodiversity and the ecosystemic services that nature provides us. Surrounding this area, we can find the buffer zone, which serves to protect the core area, and within we can is allowed to do research activities, livestock, ecotourism, and all kind of activities that are that have a low impact in the natural resources. And finally, the transition area, which is really important. Without this area, the biosphere reserve, it doesn't exist. This area serves for human activity, human development, economy, society, and so on. So this is the main difference between a national park and a biosphere reserve. The fact that humans have its own area, and it is recognized the relationship between humans and the landscapes. So when an area, when a country, when a region it is recognized as a biosphere reserve, automatically it becomes part of the world network of biosphere reserve, which is a network for sharing knowledge, cooperation, exchange experience, and build up capacities to improve some skills and knowledge about the best practice. Nowadays, there are 727 biosphere reserves around the world, which represent 5% of the Earth's surface. And this data, I think, is very important. Is the home of 260 million people. Again, the people has a lot of importance into the biosphere reserve. And finally, just to know it, this involved 131 countries. So it's a figure quite extended around the world, and it has a lot to do helping us to improve and implement the sustainable development goals. Biosphere in the practice, we have seen that there are places that seek to reconcile the conservation of biological and cultural diversity and the economic and social development through partnership between peoples and nature that are ideally to test and demonstrate innovative approach to sustainable development from local to international scale. So they are a kind of living lab to test new approach in order to achieve, to conduct the best practice to implement all these sustainable development goals, but also other ongoing projects such as the EPCC or the EPBES. The main idea is to provide local solutions to the global change challenge. And this is the main function. So in this sense, we can also, Biosphere Reserve can be seen as a lever for resilience building. Why? Because in this approach of involving all the stakeholders, involving all in a cross-sectorial way, all the communities, it's supposed to be more easy to foster this awareness raising in all the strata of the society. So at the end, will be more easy to involve every person into building up a more resilient society. But with the idea that people are not the problem, if you are able to put it inside the solution. So yes, increasing community resilience through social commitment, adopting an integrated and cooperative governance model, and to do so, Biosphere Reserve are the living labs in which people and nature learn again how to live and thrive together. So at the end, it's rethinking and learning again how to cooperate with nature to increase our life quality and those of our the new generations. To shifting from local conflicts to territorial consensus, this is the motto of UNESCO's Biosphere Reserve, and this means that again, Biosphere Reserve, far from being a single level, it's a tool, has to be a tool for looking for this consensus. In fact, during the stage of preparing the application process, it is mandatory and it is very important to be able to demonstrate that the project management plan has figured out from the bottom up, with a bottom up approach, doing some participatory process with all the stakeholders of the territory. So at the end, you are going to present to the UNESCO this management plan with a lifespan of 10 years, and which has inside all the necessities and all the commitments, actions accorded with the stakeholders or all the community, such as politics, economic actors, cities, NGOs, researchers, and so on. And this is the first step for establishing a community-based management system, which we are going to see deeper now. But not all is so easy, and of course there are some difficulties and weaknesses we have to face, and we have to think how to solve it. These difficulties are almost the difficulty that people living inside the biosphere reserve have to understand the single meaning. This means that sometimes the fact that we use reserve convey the message of an area where people are excluded. This is quite easy to solve, just changing the word of reserve by territory, by land, by region. UNESCO allows to do this. Then Sometimes some people think that this biosphere reserve label it's a kind of cosmetic add-on without content, just a greenwashing for a region. Again, some difficulties about how to communicate the sense of this figure. Sometimes, it's not very commonly, but sometimes happens. In fact, we are experiencing this in a little region of Andorra, which is a biosphere reserve. Some scientists, some policymakers and decision makers, and even some local communities are really unaware about what is this of biosphere reserve, what it looks for, and what are the potential benefits to live inside a biosphere reserve. This is very difficult to face and to solve. It will need more time. Has to be worked doing on the short and medium term, and needs a lot of efficient communication. And finally, another difficulty is that biosphere reserves still need to build trust through real relationships with communities and other relevant stakeholders. At the end, all these ideas goes in the same sense, and they give feedback ones to the others. And with this, we will give you the floor to Fernando.
Okay. Thank you very much, Marc. So thank you for this introduction, this glimpse of what are biosphere reserves. So you've introduced already the Living Lab word, as you've seen that also the UNESCO is already using in this framework, and they are introducing this nice topic to all this framework. And we really think that this link, and this is why we wanted to do this workshop, because the linkage between these two frameworks, the Biosphere Reserve and the Living Labs, have a great potentials, and some of the weaknesses that you pointed out probably we will see in the coming presentation, that's starting not to solve maybe, but starting to give an insight of how we could really work. And this is why we want to introduce, well, to give the floor to Fernando, that will explain us in much more detail why Living Labs are a very interesting tools, and also with sharing some of their experiences, because they are ones that from years ago they are using this framework and have already some results and some experience to really share and give us nice insight. So please, Fernando, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marc. Please, can you confirm that you can hear me and see my screen?
Looks good.
Yes.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Marc, again, and all the colleagues from Andorra, Maggie, and our colleagues from Taipei. It's a pleasure to me to have received this invitation, and I would like to have the pleasure also to introduce you to the European Network of Living Labs, another network that is working in very similar approaches, basically to unveil the potential of innovation and the citizen participation in our cities and communities. First, let me start with a short introduction about myself. This is the place where I work, the Computer Vision Center. The Centre de Visió per Computador is very close to Andorra, in Catalonia, in Barcelona. And I am a professor there, associate professor at Machine Learning, Robotics, and Open Innovation. I'm the associate director of the Computer Vision Center. It's a place devoted to computer vision, which is the artificial intelligence of images and videos. Basically, what we do is we teach computers to see and understand images the way that the humans do. At least that is why we try to do it. So we have a component of science, pure science, applied science as well, and oriented, and definitely technology transfer. Half of our works are, of our projects are for competitive research, and the others working with companies in trying to convey this information, this technology, to the companies as well, and to create a social impact. And for that reason, we have been, and particularly myself, I've been interested in the social impact of artificial intelligence beyond the investment approach related to what is changing in our cities when we include a computer vision. For that reason, we are collaborating in order to orchestrate what we call the Computer Vision Catalan Alliance, which is a great cluster of different players, administrations, public administrations, universities creating knowledge and generating the basis for pure players to have these products, services, and distributors, and other integrators and big firms to translate that to the market and to the to the daily life of our citizens as well. This is the concept of ecosystem, the approach we are working together with the Catalan government and participating in this strategic alliance also for the agenda of artificial intelligence in Catalonia. From this perspective, we have been exploring also the concepts of living labs, and we have had a pilot in the last 9 years, which is the Library Living Lab in a metropolitan area of Barcelona, exploring how technology transforms the cultural experience of people using tools and events such as Experiment AI and others, working together with philosophers, artists, and scientists and city planners in order to understand how this technology that could be tested in demos in public libraries can receive the feedback from the citizens as well. I want to mention that this may seem a small step, and it is, but it had a strong systemic change, and I will talk about that during my presentation. And this systemic change is now the regional network of libraries, public libraries in Barcelona, has a program called Bibliolab. And the logo of this program that you can see here has in it the words create, innovate, experiment, which is definitely a systemic change in how the public libraries are perceived themselves, not only just a repository of books, but a hubs for knowledge of human archives as well, in order to provide an element of democratization of innovation as well. So this is this concept of systemic transformation beyond specific place-based approach is something that I will develop during my presentation in the following minutes. Well, this is just one example of Living Lab, but we are having a network, which is the European Network of Living Labs and all, which was born in the year 2006 from a project of the European Commission in the framework of the Open Innovation 2.0 and under the Finnish presidency. So now this is like a teenager network, and I'm very happy to know more about the City Science Network and the potential collaborations that we can have in this point. I have had the pleasure to be in the chairperson of Enol until very recently, until our last event. So we have an event like yours 3 weeks ago, the Open Living Lab Days, and I will give you a pointer to it in my last slide. But now I have to mention that this global network has the people at the center and aiming at empowering everyone to innovate, facilitating knowledge exchange between different living labs that we are having in different cities and communities and regions from different natures, and trying to create common training. Capacity building is an element that is essential in terms of open innovation, because innovation is not happening for free from different dimensions for free, and having joint consortia as well for projects, and influencing, injecting this vision of living labs, citizen-centric, multi-stakeholder innovation, also European community, the European Commission, and around the world. Because if you see the picture, you will see that the European Network of Living Lab is now currently a global phenomenon, a global movement, with colleagues in Canada, Korea, Taiwan, and we have a member at Taiwan Living Lab, which are very proud to be one of the core members, Australia as well, and also developing networks in Africa. So basically, what is the perception? Because could be the case that a number of you are also familiar with the concept of Living Lab, but probably not everybody is. In one slide, living labs are about innovation. This is the key element. They are about innovation, creating new products, services, or processes or policies. But this is an open innovation process in an open innovation ecosystem. The vision that ENOL is providing is now in a citizen-centric approach, very clearly multi-stakeholder implementation based on a systemic user co-creation approach. And co-creation methods are permanent in the approach of the projects that the members of ENOL are having. As you can see, ENOL is having a quality assessment process of the living labs belonging to the network that provides a labeling, and this labeling allows for the members to guarantee that they are doing this approach that is integrating these co-creation processes in a user-centric approach. And it also integrates the communities and the cities, of course, from a perspective of multiple helix. You already probably are familiar with this concept: government, industry, people, and academia working together in order to tackle the complex problems that we are having, and with a set of basic features that I would like to spend just a couple of minutes to develop in the next slides. The first of all that I would like to mention is that the co-creation, as I was mentioning, is the focus in which the living lab approach is tackled by ENOL, and in a real life setting. And it is the real life setting that creates an actual experience for the active user involvement, for the citizens to participate in the process of open innovation. And this could be maybe a road in order to understand which is the current mobility, maybe a hospital in order to understand what is the current public services for health, or maybe a farm in which what is happening is the production and in order to understand how waste management and the cycle from farm to fork is happening. So this is key. And this is key because in this orchestration, we are tackling the test before invest approach, meaning that these innovations that are happening are allowing we to have a clear understanding of the impacts that are being created. Of course, if we're having this 4-helix, this 4-helix implies to integrate a multi-stakeholder approach, which is not meaning only a number of companies, but a number of different stakeholders, as I was mentioning for the multiple helix. This implies a complexity of multi-methodological approach, and for that reason, we need to understand which are the dynamics involved in these processes. And here, this is clearly through this multi-stakeholder approach and multi-methodological approach that we can tackle this systemic approach to innovation. So it is not only that we're having a place-based innovation, but by having public administration and the academia there, we can scale up through the network as well. And here's the value of the network is essential. We can scale up the solutions and approaches that we are having. Definitely, industry is providing new products and services. From the academia, we have the role of knowledge generation. And academia is here changing also a new mission in social impact as well, by the integration in this quadruple helix. And with the public, we are developing public government, we are developing the public procurement. Public procurement of innovation is also a tool that can be used from this approach. And a very recently, the regulatory adaptation, and we are working together with the European Commission in this understanding of living labs as regulatory learning tools, which is essential in this test before invest to understand which are the changes that we have to apply, and particularly in my field, in artificial intelligence, in order to avoid the rejection, in order to avoid the not assumption and adoption of technology by our citizens and by the institutions. Definitely our citizens are contributing with these user-centric needs, but also the opportunities. It is not only about needs, it's about the specific place-based opportunities that we're having in every regional innovation ecosystem. So this is a constructive approach, right, to the features and the approaches of the living labs. But as Marc was mentioning at the beginning, the real keyword today is how, not the what, right? So in the European Network of Living Labs, we have organized the actions in what we call 5 action-oriented task forces for systemic citizen-centric multi-stakeholder innovation. These are verticals in which we are having members of ENOL working and coordinating actions. So every living lab can get associated to one social, to one action-oriented task force. And it is by collaborating in a subnetwork, in a topic subnetwork, that we are being able to tackle specific challenges. For instance, in social innovation and digital rights, we are trying to understand how to scale up this approach of connecting living labs, of connecting heterogeneous labs, as a matter of fact. And I will give you an example that is being developed by our colleagues in Catalonia and also our colleagues in the United Kingdom, in the region of Bristol. In the action-oriented task force for social impact of AI, we are trying to understand how we can develop, unveil the social impact that artificial intelligence is having, because it is not true that we know that what is going to happen when you implement a specific tool or system based on something which could be intrusive with our identity, or new digital identities, or something that could definitely have an adoption and acceptance from the citizens. We have been working with artists together with that in living labs in which arts is being the driving force for this to happen in cities, and we have a strong group also working in mobility, working together with the Joint Research Center in the European Commission in order to understand how this road, right, to the autonomous car and to the restructuring and planning of the cities can be dealt in a citizen-centric approach. For the Health and Wellbeing Task Force, we are working in interoperability, in trying to harmonize that things that are happening in one country or one region can be replicated in another place, and also understanding health not only as a service when you are sick, but a path from patient to protagonist, in trying to evolve this living lab perception into a holistic approach to the health service and to the well-being itself. Regarding energy and environment, and here in these two last, I can definitely reflect on the presentation presented by Marc before. Definitely there is a transition that we are facing. A transition not only in terms of the fuels that we are using, but also in terms of the habits that we as citizens are having, or the way in which we are tackling these resources. And for this reason, it is essential to make from the beginning this energy approach. Particularly in Catalonia, we're doing that in the transition for the green hydrogen, and with our colleagues in Switzerland, we are doing that in order to understand how waste management, not only in the terrain, but also in other rural areas. And here in rural areas, definitely have the concept of agri-food and the conception of from farm to fork. But in addition to that, we are having also the element of transforming these rural areas, not only for as the farms and the places where we obtain food, but, and this is something that we have been discussing with Marc, and we are looking forward to continue discussing, to understand how leisure and how other economic business models can be applied to these rural areas, which include also the digital capacitation of the inhabitants of these areas. Let me please give you just very briefly, because time flies by, a summary of what is happening in the task force of the social innovation and digital rights, with an example of a program supported by the Catalan government in the South Catalonia. So the key message here probably would be that beyond our hard technologies that we all know, artificial intelligence is one of them, IoT, all of this is transversal, right, to these 5 verticals. We are needing also an element of soft technologies, of social technologies. And this is exactly what we are trying to develop in South Catalonia in order to connect all the innovation arenas and all the living labs and regional labs, fab labs, university labs, etc., in order to tackle one challenge together. And in this case, this is the transition from the solid from the carbon fuels to the green hydrogen. And this is basically one of the approaches that we are doing. So the basic is not just the investment for the industrial transformation, but also the social investment in order for the transformation of the underlying infrastructures, allowing these innovation actors to put their efforts together. This has been implemented with the support of the Digital Policies Department in the government of Catalonia, in the southern Catalonia, and now it is evolving also for the area of Girona and Anoia. In every different region, we have completely different ecosystems, and eventually this framework is having to get adapted to shared agendas that are going to be happening in every step. So as you can see, this is an element of actual social innovation in the terms that we are transforming also the policies that are supporting innovation locally in a bottom-up approach. This is also linked to the funding, the regional funding that we can have here. And I would like to highlight that in particular in Catalonia, there are these specs which are the projects that are in which municipalities can apply in order to develop innovation. Some of the specs, they are having living labs on them, and this is essential because with that, we are also training our municipalities in the concepts of open innovation. And this is a process. This is something that is not going to happen from today to tomorrow. And I have, for instance, participated in one in which we're using, and we were commenting also with Maggie at the beginning of the discussion, citizen science. The participation of the citizens in the process of scientific knowledge generation through the SPEC project in order to have the evidence-based approach to the changes, for instance, in waste management. And this was done in a village of the metropolitan area of Barcelona. And I perceive that citizen science is going to be a very strong component allowing citizen engagement in these open innovation approaches. So this was just a very quick approach to the strategy vision and for Enol. But as I was mentioning before, capacity building is the base of everything because innovation is not happening for free. So what we have perceived is that we had the need, the clear need from our members to have a capacity building program in which our members, not the office, our members can contribute hand in hand to other living labs to start growing. And one of the first approaches is the virtual learning lab, which is an 8-week learning process by in the internet, online, in which we share with them approaches to for-relic stakeholder engagement, citizen engagement tools and methods. Tools are essential in order to make things done. And governance models. Governance models are basic in order to allow this multi-stakeholder approach to be stable and not to fall down, and sustainability as well with business models associated with the living lab. So I invite you to check the webpage and know more about that. And also, in all, I think that it has been having a strong commitment in having these publications open, and you can have more information regarding the project portfolio. Projects will help you probably settle down this generic approach and vision of how open innovation can happen with the specific areas and task forces, but also the development of the concept of cities as living labs and other publications carried out with organizations such as the Citizen Driven Innovation with the World Bank and others with the United Nations and the European Commission, and methodologies and toolboxes. I think that this is essential because when we are starting doing things, we need to start with something which is tangible. At least this could be a very good point. But the entry point is really meeting each other. Now with COVID and the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic has been really dramatic to do that, but we are usually having on the second week of September, the Open Living Lab Days. This is the place to engage. This is the place to get engaged into the action-oriented task forces, into the capacity building projects. If you're really interested in that, I welcome you to do it and not to wait, because the sooner you do it, the better you will get with people that has walked the same walk that you are doing now. And muchas gracias, Marc, for the invitation. Thank you very much. If you have any question, please let me know.
Okay, thank you very much, Fernando. So thank you, Marc, again too. So the idea was to give you this quick, because we have not too much time, but for the ones that you were not so familiar with these two frameworks. So really the idea is to do this quick introduction about them, and mainly to write a discussion that maybe we would like to do right now about how do you think this framework really would help us to move from this global definition of problems to really action to these hyperlocal problems, to move to action to solutions. And just wrapping up a little bit what we've been discussing right now. So we're saying that, no, that we are really having a gap between this definition of strategies, policies, whatever, to the real action. And as Fernando said, the question is that we know more or less where we want to know, or where we want to go, where should be our future communities and societies, but we are still failing in how to do it, no? And this is why we wanted to talk about these two frameworks, the UNESCO Biosphere Reserve and the Living Lab approach, that really can help us to focus on the how. And this is a little bit what we've been telling, no, today, that we've seen that there is this need of based on holistic and systemic integral assessment of these needs. So really to move from these global problems to the reality of how these global problems are affecting the local or the local communities, that we see that there is still this gap, and also to this need of co-create inclusively these potential solutions, because we know that so far there is this gap of this inclusiveness, not only in the definition, but also in the implementation. Also establishing this city-centric community-based management system. No? We think that the basics of the Biosphere Reserve, that what we think is interesting is rather than the label, like sometimes the UNESCO it's seen, labels, it's seen just as a label, of, as Marc was saying, as greenwashing labels. We think that could be, so taking advantage of that, because sometimes there are some stakeholders that they only focus on this label. So the intrinsic need of this community-based management system that implies this framework could be a nice first step to really start to implement these frameworks and this new way of acting, of doing policies and implementing changing communities. And as we said, so this figure could help us to this multi-stakeholder binding commitment. So it's not the binding of hard binding, but it implies a certain binding, a certain commitment, because when you apply to this figure and you do this commitment based on this consensus of these different stakeholders, that should be humble in the beginning, but this is a first step to really build this community commitment to apply to this figure. And this is, we think, is a very interesting point, that sometimes we lack, no, some kind of bindings. And we see, no, we have the energy transition strategies, we have the carbon neutral strategy, but finally there are strategies looking at the future or midterm, and finally they don't have any binding or anyone that could be really assessing if we are performing well or not, or if we are achieving our commitments. And we think this framework could be interesting. And finally, so that this is one of the main points that the Living Lab are giving us, and this is why the two frameworks we think are quite interesting together, is that this necessity of inclusive, agile, and responsive way to test, implement, reassess, and readapt all these policy solutions and actions in these really fast loops of multi-stakeholders that Fernando was talking. Yes? No, we really are seeing that we have strategies that look in the future, but we are not, as community, really assessing if the actions that we are doing are performing well, if they are affecting as they should be at the different dimensions with the citizens, with the economic actors, so on. So we really need of this kind of figures, of this kind of framework that will help us to create this open innovation environments that really help us to really prototype, test, and reassess in a continuous way all these actions and solutions that we need. As Fernando said, no, that they are some in the market, some are in the academia, but usually we are quite isolated, these different dimensions, and the need that this co-creation should be effective is mainly one of the main main points that we need for move from these actions to really impacting communities. So that was just a little bit the message or the topics that we wanted to move to the floor. So now if some of the participants have any question for Fernando or Marc about Biosphere Reserves or about Living Labs, so please feel free to send us the questions.
Yeah, so folks, you can either open your microphone to ask your question if you feel comfortable, or certainly type it in the chat and we can read it for you. Or last, definitely raise your Webex digital hand and we'll call on you there. So a few different ways to engage with the Q&A. And Maria, I see that you have a question. Did you want to go ahead and open your mic and ask?
Did I?
Hi.
Yes. So first of all, thank you very much, Fernando and Marc, for the inspirational talk. So I'm really working on these kind of topics right now. And the other day, I just was recommended to read kind of a provocative paper about citizen participation, where different levels of participation were defined from, let's say, support engineering to citizen empowerment based on the level of power redistribution of each of these steps, let's say. Of course, it's a simplification. But yeah, I would really appreciate it if you could give us maybe an example of a tool that you're using to create this kind of bottom-up participatory approaches. I'm really interested in the tools that you might be using related to AI, for instance. I'm also working on these kind of approaches, and I was wondering if some of the tools that are being used are transparent enough, understandable enough for citizens, and how you intend to create this kind of bottom-up understanding of how those tools work. I don't know if you have any particular examples that you could give us, but I would really appreciate it because I'm also working on these kind of topics, and there's always this debate of participatory design, co-design, co-creation, and so forth, and at what stage of the design process you're introducing your citizens, whether if it's just a consultation or you're giving them the tools to reshape the technology or the consequences that they might be willing to get out of them. So thanks.
Fernando, do you want to answer this question?
Yes, sure. Well, Mireia, thank you very much. I perceive that for your name, maybe you are also Catalan or Spanish, or because it's a Spanish name, isn't it?
No, right now I'm a PhD student at TU Delft.
Okay, but Mireia is a Spanish name as well.
Yeah, I'm from the Basque Country.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I can give you a couple of examples. I perceive that there is a latent question, a latent keyword in your question, which is the scale to what this citizen engagement is happening. Right? I perceive it, but without entering into that, I can give you a couple of examples of projects. The first one is more closely related to artificial intelligence component, in which we are collaborating in a metropolitan area of Barcelona with a company of performing arts. Maybe you know them. They come this La Fura dels Baus. So La Fura dels Baus is one of the most renowned street performing artists, and they have now a foundation. This foundation, they are having a big space, which is a renewed old factory, okay, in which they are inviting all the people from Badalona, in the north of Barcelona, in order to attend their performing arts. This is very interesting because when you are attending to one of these performances, you know that this is not true in the sense of real life, but there is truth in the performing, meaning that there is something happening there, and you have to be participant of them because this is performing arts, which is participatory performing arts, and we're being collaborating together with researchers from the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona and the Computer Vision Center as well, in order to include these technologies, in order to understand how the process of memory are settled in moments of stress. These are science, a component of pure science, but also a component of understanding the adoption of tools for artificial intelligence. So this is something very weird, right? And but I perceive that art and artistic performances would be an enormous way of engaging with people. We tried that also, and we did that in the public libraries, in which we were doing this experiment AI approach with demos of artificial intelligence, of computer vision, basically, that were developed, and we invited the people to interact with them. There is a concept here, which is I was mentioning that the sandboxing, right? Trying the things, right, in a safe scenario, and this opens the world, the door to other component, which is anticipatory regulation. And this is very interesting, because if we are inviting people to participate in a process, there's a clear outcome for them. There has to be a clear outcome for them to happen. And we are clearly stating that whatever happens here will be the basis for the new regulation that will be that will be happening in their lives. They will have a clear understanding about how this outcome is happening. When you are doing this in a public library, you already have the people engaged on that. But what we are usually making sure is that these citizen associations or organizations are present in the project from the minute zero, so that we can have either a place where we already have the citizens, we don't have to engage them, to call them for engagement, or they are also in the project. And another example of that, completely different, is the project that I was commenting with our colleagues from Switzerland for the understanding of new habits for recycling, for waste recycling, right? So in this approach, citizens are there from the beginning in the project. So they are part from the design of the project as well. So they were invited in the moment of the definition of the process, because this was going to take place in their communities. And from my perspective, this is a good way forward in order to understand also which are the alpha users that you can have in your community that will be those to drag the rest of the community, right? And this concept of alpha user, for me at least, is quite relevant, right? So it is not all of us has the same level of implication in the day-by-life activities of an open project, and but there are some of them that they really want to participate and contribute, and it is these people that are able to drag the rest of the people. And the final example, and I close to this, is this, and also in the field of waste management, just not to open too much the variety. We have been working with this component of citizen science. So this means that in this process of waste management in this municipality of the metropolitan area of Barcelona, people from the neighborhoods, probably some of these alpha users and others, have been invited in order to co-create a process that will change the way in which they will collect their waste, and in which they will redistribute their waste. So they know from the moment zero that this will have an impact. And the commitment, and Marc was mentioning about this commitment, this stakeholder commitment, is that the result of that, which will be a gamification approach to the process, will be implemented. So this political promise, let's say, should have to be implemented in order to allow for the credibility of the innovation process to happen. But again, these citizens are participating in the moment zero before in the design approach. And citizen science here could be a relevant element in order to get the evidences, right? The scientific evidences supporting the final implementation of a final innovation.
Thanks very much for the answer.
Just to add from our experience here in Andorra, so just complementing a little what Fernando was saying. So yeah, we started several participatory processes in order to co-create, for example, new laws or new strategic plans, for example, the circular economy, so on. And we've seen that we are having the capacity to different tools, be online, offline, to reach all the people that is interested and engaged but we are still lacking. We have the impression that we were discussing with several stakeholders, that at the end, we are all the same together. So we are not reaching, this is one of the things that we are experiencing, for example, in the process of the Biosphere Reserve, that there is one niche of people that is not in this co-creation. So we have these different stakeholders represented that are usually the ones that are most well informed about the topic we want to co-create. However, we are having problems exactly with one niche of the citizens that are the people that we could say, or we could finally say that they don't care. But in fact, they care, but maybe they don't, we really cannot achieve to really engage them and really have their voice in this co-creation that at the end is really, really, really important. And this is how it comes, the topic that Fernando said, that these new ways of engaging people, being through arts, be through virtual reality and new technologies to really give them the information differently than the channels that we are doing right now, because right now they don't get. And this is what I was saying about the need to transfer in these global problems to these hyperlocal problems and reality of these people. So we are not touching yet how they are affected or how they can contribute to this co-creation. And this is how it's very important, I think, all these new ways of communicating the topics to really make them aware and really have the impact to engage them in this. And this is what the lines that Fernando and some other people is working about, new ways of using technology to communicate and to engage to these processes that we are really, really happy here to explore.
Mark, let me say something. We still have the right of not caring at all. Eh? So maybe there is some, when you're saying that some people, they don't care, they have the right to do it. And some people would not engage because this is our nature. I mean, it's, you can be an alpha user or you can not caring at all. And it doesn't matter the way in which you communicate, you still have the right to not care. For that reason, what I perceive is that before developing this communication approach, which is essential, and dissemination is essential, there is a capacity building, there is a learning process. I mean, to understand which is the impact of, to try to help everyone to have the opportunity of understanding which is the impact of the systemic change that is happening. Without doing this first, no one will care if they are not caring now. And this process, probably we failed a lot. And when I look at the Living Lab history, I think that, as I was mentioning, open innovation is not happening for free. We definitely need to have an underlying a basis, the foundations of that. And for that reason, I think that we have still a long road to walk in open innovation capacity building, let's say, no? Open innovation for all. This is something that we are working together and at Enol. And for me, this is essential because the hypothesis that if you communicate better, then they will understand and they will care. I object. I don't think that we have the right of not caring at all about what is super interesting for me. For instance, as artificial intelligence, I'm passionate about that. But I have to accept that people maybe just think that this is so boring that they will not waste a minute of their life in getting involved and engaged on that.
Well, first of all, I think congratulations for the huge effort that Andorra is doing to become, like a country in the middle of a biosphere. I think that's super, 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 super good, and you are breaking the ice for the future of the cities. I think like this idea of coexisting with nature is something that it should be like by default. No, actually, the cities, they used to be like by default part of nature, somehow very well connected, etc. In Guadalajara, Mexico, we have our collaboration is with the Museum of Science, and the Museum of Nature is talking all the time about the connection between the city and nature. So I think somehow you are setting a precedent here. You are building like a methodology to how in the future cities will be like connected with nature and in sync with nature, etc. And I think that is a huge challenge, and we need to be careful. And as Mark was saying, we cannot greenwash, put like green paint everything and say that this is sustainable. So I think in your shoulders there is a lot of pressure, but at the same time a lot of beauty. So we are super happy to be part of that adventure with you, and it could be fantastic. Like start from to know a little bit what is the entry point, what is like the first step now probably, and what is the biggest challenge, because probably you have to align not only the government but all the Andorra industry and all the Andorra citizens to say, okay, this is good. We are going to have a lot of restrictions, but at the same time, we are going to have a lot of good things happening, a new green industry, a new. So how do you face that? How do you approach that? And what is the first like basic thing? And I see Jason that also he wants to talk. So and probably he has something smarter than me to ask. So maybe we can listen to Jason. But that's my question here is like, what is the entry point? What is the first small step to this huge adventure that is so beautiful? And I think this is, I mean, I am super proud of somehow being connected to you guys and seeing how you are moving forward.
Yeah, just fast to have time for the others. It was exactly that, and rather Fernando that communicating, it was community capacity building. What I was meant to say that this is Luis. So we have the fact or the curiosity or what we didn't expect, that we have politicians, society, researchers, and the economic actors that they have clear where they have to go. So we have a level of consensus that we didn't expect in really fast time. However, that we have all the 4 dimensions talking the same language, we are not having the impact to go as fast as we need. Even we have a small country, even we have this proximity that sit together 2 ministers, as you know, we are going slow too. And this is why it's fascinating for us how we can do it to really have this click, this connection to, and the question, and was the answer was that we still have to interiorize this framework or these processes that really make us change happen, because still we have this that is surprising right now, that we have ministers and politicians saying, okay, we go for a biosphere reserve in a country that is a country with high it's sustainable because it's in the environment that we are, but the economic model is the opposite of sustainable, maturity, so on, So, but this is the question, and this is why we choose this topic, is how really we can make this capacity building of these processes that are having such a great success in local issues or in local experiences, like Fernando was saying, but to really make huge changes at country scale, we think it's promising, but we're still missing something that help us to make this click to really make the machine performing well.
Thank you. Jason, maybe you can make the question, or?
Hi, Luis. Yeah, I first wanted to react to something that you brought up, which I quite liked, and I think is actually really critical to the notion of biosphere reserve, which I'll also comment on in just a bit. But the fact that cities should connect to nature and ecosystems, like ecosystems are almost entirely about connection, and this is I think actually in Marc Pons' slides, there is a slide about the appropriate zonation model. And this is, I guess, a minor critique, which is, I think the model's backwards. And because the way it looks in the slide is that somehow the reserve, and that word I think is a little bit troubling, and I know it's not your word, but it's almost as if this is something special that we're locking and protecting from the rest of the world. And And I think that needs to be flipped because it's the connections between diverse ecosystems that allows species to thrive and allows sort of the migratory patterns to be preserved. And there are researchers really interested in this problem and sort of looking at how do we actually maintain migratory corridors across the earth rather than sort of locking away. And I think just the way to, if you flip the model, the way to think about this is how can we constrain human industry, sort of the extractive and exploitive part that disrupts the ecosystems, thinking about locking that away rather than sort of locking away and protecting the ecological or biosphere preserves. That's it basically.
Yeah, thank you. I think you are completely right. But it is important to take in mind that the central area, it's just for protecting these special habitats or these endemic species with high value. Then on the others, on the buffer and the transition zone, the main goal is to find out how to coexist, to live in harmony with the natural dynamics and the ecosystems services. We have to take in mind that communities need to earn his life, to develop, to live in the area. And as an example, in the Pyrenean mountain, a lot of habitats are the result of the interaction between the different farm and livestock activities along a lot of years. And so it depends on the human activities. This is the meadows, the alpine grasslands, some kind of forest also depends on the activities of human. So a little bit, the Biosphere Reserve try to protect these cultural landscapes, and but putting the people on the middle of the biosphere, because without these people, it is quite difficult, even impossible, to maintain on the long term these kind of landscapes and all this biodiversity related to this. And the most tricky thing or the most difficult is to figure out, to imagine how we can change things we are doing now to improve it and to have a win-win result. This is, of course, is the most difficult, and we hope and we think that living labs and as well other approaches will help to figure out how to reach this point.
Jason, I agree too with you. In fact, it's one of the topics that we've been discussing here in this kind of zoning, and even the vision of what I would like that could be interesting. So they do this schematic of 3 zones and 1 middle core area, 1 buffer, and that. And finally discussing with them, because even they are quite strict with this kind of figure, that maybe this could be the starting, because this is how we mainly are settled. We have some protected area, some urbanized, and they even don't interact, or they are not well. And this is why this framework is interesting, but they moving to talk from ecosystem to socio-ecosystems. And this is a concept that maybe you wanted to say, that rather than zoning this, finally we should go to this merging and this mixing more heterogeneity between the urban, rural, and these more mixed patches that we are rather than zoning strictly with these protected buffers, so on, and this really mixing this human and biosphere functions. And that would be, I think, the finally goal, moving from this strict zoning to finally this nice merging between the biosphere, the ecosystemic function, and the social function. I think that maybe is in the vision, I think, of the Biosphere Reserve, it is one, but I think that maybe trying to really engage, and this is why so many biosphere are right now inside, is why they keep it so with this kind of zoning. But totally agree with your vision about that is a little bit contradictory.
Yeah, thank you. I actually really appreciate your comments on that. I do think it is to some extent partly like a branding issue. It's sort of, if you want to have this unified message that you're conveying, it's probably easiest to start with, well, here is where we are and here are the easy first steps. But I also think it's worth having sort of an even bigger picture approach where, okay, well, this is where we're starting, but here somewhere else is where we're going. And so just a thought, something, I don't know, I'd be happy to chat ways about possibly making that happen.
We have just a few more minutes with the Andorra team, everyone. So any other thoughts or any questions bubbling up from anyone new?
Yeah, sorry. Just one comment for Luis Alonso. We like to say that before to become a biosphere reserve, you have to behave and act as one. So it's not like let's do all this work to become a biosphere reserve. There is a lot of work, a previous work, just to try to act like a biosphere reserve. So there need a lot of previous legislative work and social work. So it's a long way.
No, just to thank you, all of you, to join us, and as always, many questions and many topics to keep working together in the network, and also together with the Enol network, that we've seen that we share quite a strong goals and ways of work. I'm really happy to see how maybe through the example of Andorra we can join efforts and help us to this big challenge that we have, and this willingness to really transform our country. So thanks again to the discussion to all of you, and we keep working together.